A very good morning to you. Welcome back to your Feel Good Breakfast Show, Expresso, here on S3. Now, of course, with the new year comes a host of breaking stories that get the nation talking, and that's why Expresso has set aside a slice of your morning to delve a little bit deeper into the most recent news with experts in the field. And so, to that point, we're back again with news editor Roy Simpson as we discuss some of the biggest headlines on front pages of newspapers across Mzansi this Friday morning. And of course, as always, we encourage you at home to join in on the discussion and share your thoughts and opinions with us on that number 063-408-8863. It's always a pleasure to see you. So how are you?
Lekker, thank you. Good morning.
Fantastic. So our first story kind of links us to Monday's story, and I guess the ongoing crisis of load shedding that we've been experiencing as a country for the longest time right now, where the South African National Energy Crisis Committee, a body that is run by the Office of President Cyril Ramaphosa, expects power outages to ease as new measures take effect. And according to the headline, Western Cape Premier Alan Winde wrote to the President saying that the national government needs to take this crisis a bit more seriously. And then there are new measures that are proposed to ease the burden of load shedding on South Africans. Do you know anything about that? Could you clue us in on some of these measures that the Office of the President and the committee has introduced that hopefully will see us maybe go a stage lighter?
I wonder how many of these are directly actually the presidential initiatives. I think there are a lot of things in the pipeline. We know, for example, that with allowing businesses to now generate their own power, we've got about 9,000 megawatts of generation capacity within the business field. So these are companies that currently draw off the national grid. 9,000 megawatts is a lot.
Absolutely.
That's an enormous amount of power, and they're going to be generating that themselves, so they won't need Eskom. There's a small caveat that's worth mentioning right now. It means also that they're not going to be giving any money to Eskom in the future. This is also
true. And yeah, we know the money issues that have been ongoing at the national power supplier. But then to that point, you talk about companies generating power for themselves. Now that there's talks of an independent power producer that has now been commissioned to start supplying power and be connected to the grid by the end of this year, or at least more than 100 privately owned power plants being developed. And I guess the big question that a lot of South Africans might be asking is that if it's that easy, and there are companies willing and able to produce power, connect to the grid, and kind of do away with the shortage, why are we not doing it already en masse?
It is a question. Some of this is genuine lag time, just how long it takes to do these things. So, for example, the grid isn't equipped everywhere to take power on board. It's there to distribute power. So you actually have to physically change the infrastructure so that you can put electricity onto it at that point. So the grid needs to be changed, and that takes time and it takes money, relatively little money compared with some of the solutions that are out there.
Exactly.
And then these companies themselves need to actually get going. So if you're going to set up a solar farm with solar panels, generating electricity, then there's going to take time to install those, to get them into the country, to get them up and running. It's also a large capital expenditure investment. It's a big amount of money. So those people want signed agreements that when they invest all this money, you are going to buy my power. So these are the drag factors. These are the things that are making it take longer than we'd like. But it's also equally true that these processes could have begun a long time ago.
Absolutely.
And certainly within the Mineral and Energy Ministry, there's been seemingly a deliberate dragging of the feet in opposition to this.
I guess a question that I have at the moment is, do you think that government could possibly be doing a better job at communicating this better, in the sense that there's all of this disparaging news that we get every single day, and you get the updates on where your particular area is, but perhaps if there was a bit more of a concerted effort to communicate the good news that there is hope on the horizon, there is a possibility of 100 power stations independently owned being connected to the grid, that might uplift the mood of the nation a bit more.
Government communication on this has been absolutely appalling. It's been terrible. We've been left in the dark, both literally and metaphorically. We know that the president, for example, cancelled his trip to the World Economic Forum because of the scale of this crisis, because he was going to personally take charge of it. And we all immediately assumed, well, family meeting time. Yeah, we're going to get together. He's going to tell us what's happening. Chups, nothing.
At the 11th hour.
Yeah.
Cancelled. And you can't have stuff like that and, uncertainty to that degree. But I guess the president has a lot to deal with right now. He's got a lot on his plate, and we'll touch on that a little bit as well in some of the latest headlines. Of course, we would love to hear from you. 063-408-8863. Please share with us your opinions on these particular topics and maybe any others that you might be concerned with as we start off this Friday morning. We'll be right back with Roy.
It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Welcome back to your Feel Good Breakfast Show as we dive right back into the action of the news headlines with news editor Roy Simpson. Of course, earlier on we discussed some of the biggest headlines in the country right now which concern load shedding. The president having cancelled his trip to the World Economic Forum in order to deal with this crisis. And we were saying earlier on, Roy, that clearly the president has a lot to deal with at the moment because currently, or as it stands, he also is facing legal matters in the sense that former President Jacob Zuma has allegedly is charging him as an accessory after the fact in his case against State Prosecutor Billy Downer and journalist Karen Morgan. So you could obviously just imagine in your own mind how much there is to deal with. So what exactly does this mean for the president?
This particular one I don't think actually means that much because it's a private prosecution and he's managed to see it off once in court already. So he went in and he applied for an interdict to stop anything happening in terms of him having to appear in court until the actual case gets heard on May the 17th or 18th, somewhere around there. So he's won himself a lot of breathing space. Also, in the judgment that was given, there was a very clear reference by Judge Sutherland that the courts have become quite intolerant of what the Stalingrad defense, this just grinding out case after case to just slow the whole process down.
Yes.
And he specifically mentioned in his judgment that the courts are a bit done with that, really. So that's already a signal that Zuma's approach isn't necessarily working, which I think takes a bit of pressure off Cyril Ramaphosa. But he's still got a lot of things on his plate. He's got Phala and other legal issues coming up for himself. But this one's kind of in abeyance for now.
All right. Well, putting that aside for just a moment, that headline over there, Fort Hare under siege, perhaps one from a time gone by, if you will, but still ongoing, and one wouldn't necessarily want to see something like that at a university. What's happening at Fort Hare?
What's happening at Fort Hare is that you have a vice-chancellor, Professor Buhlungu, who's trying to clean up historical corruption and these sort of tender processes that are obviously benefiting people who shouldn't be benefiting from them. And in that process, he's landed up needing a bodyguard. And 2 weeks ago, where this headline comes from, that bodyguard got shot and killed. With what it appears to have been an assassination attempt on him. And a year ago, the fleet manager for the university got shot and killed.
My goodness.
And then just yesterday, we heard that one of his colleagues has been found bound and gagged in their flat. Didn't arrive for work. The rest of the faculty went, where is this individual? Went to their home and found them sort of duct taped up and bound. So it really is quite problematic. There's some real issues happening there as they try and tackle corruption. And again, I think this flows back to the president's desk, because now this ties in with the other hits on whistleblowers. I'm thinking Babita Deokara, and I'm thinking the police's own Colonel Charles Kinnear.
Yes.
Really high-profile people who've been killed for trying to dismantle or at least expose corruption.
Yeah.
And that's an issue, and that's an issue that needs executive attention.
Absolutely, on a national scale. All right, going to international news right now, where President Vladimir Zelensky of the Ukraine has made an address and an appeal to Western countries to come to Ukraine's aid. And even further than that, of course, there's talks of a finalization of a $2.5 billion military aid from the US. Do you know what is the current update as to what is happening right now in terms of the war, the Russia and Ukraine?
Stalemate, pretty much. There's not a lot happening militarily in terms of territorial gains and things like that. So this is why this kind of thing is really important to Zelensky. And he's not just talking about an amount of money, because the US has been pouring billions into this, and NATO in general have been pouring a lot of money into Ukraine. What he's wanting, he's now wanting a particular kind of armament. He's wanting battle tanks. So he's looking to Germany to supply him with Leopard 2 battle tanks so that they can go on the offensive. because the strategy so far has been to arm Ukraine to defend itself.
Right.
And that's how we've got this stalemate, because it's perfectly capable of defending itself, Russia's perfectly capable of attacking, and they kind of ground to a bit of a halt. So now they want to go on the offensive, but they need the military hardware to do that. And that's what they're looking to. And I know there's a bit of a conflict within NATO. Germany, for example, has said, look, we'll only give the Leopard tanks if America also gives battle tanks.
Right, so come with us into this fray so that we're not kind of single-handedly seen as the aiding party, if you will.
That's part of it. I'm not entirely sure what the internal politics within NATO is, but it's a proxy war already in practice, and next month we go into a year of this conflict, and I think that's why minds are changing within NATO. It's clear that Russia is not going to suddenly give up and go, oh, you know, we're not succeeding, let's go home and have some tea. Not going to happen. So now a new strategy is needed, and it looks like arming Ukraine for an offensive capability is on the agenda, and I'm not entirely sure where that takes us.
Where do you think the switch might be? What might be that critical moment that might either, one, urge Russia to back off, or just for parties to call it a truce in some way? What might that switch be?
I think the switch is going to be Russia's internal politics. I think when Vladimir Putin experiences some kind of an internal revolution, when his back's against the wall, then we might see a change. But for now, it's an information war. There's a lot of propaganda happening. The understanding of what's going down in Ukraine within the Russian public's mind is vastly different from what you and I think watching mostly Western media. And until that changes, until the domestic situation changes, I don't see anything changing. I think it has to come from Putin.
Yeah. Roy, as always,
Lekker.
Thank you very much. Hope you have a great weekend.
Thank you.
We'll see you again next week. Thank you very much to Roy Simpson, of course, our news editor, always cluing us in on the latest news headlines. And of course, we'd love to hear your opinions on all of these stories and more that concern you. Give us a call or give us a voice note on 063 408 8863. But let's continue this Friday, shall we?